Workshop 2. Workshop 2.
Hi, everyone.
No, you didn't. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
Hi, everyone. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, sorry. This is my first time wearing earphones with a microphone, so apologies. I want to thank you all for coming here today. This session is multi-stakeholder cooperation in an era of increased protectionism. We have a panel full of experts, and I'm really excited to dive right in and hear from them. I really would like this to be an interactive session, and I really want to encourage you all to get up to the microphone and ask questions. So there won't be any long speeches or anything like that here. What we're hoping to achieve in this session is a shared understanding in advancing the multi-stakeholder model to internet governance and more broadly digital governance. Also, hopefully discussions around a tentative roadmap for community engagement for the WSIS Plus 20 negotiations and strengthened collaboration between academia, governments, industry, civil society, and the technical community. My name is Cheryl Miller, and I'm the Vice President for Digital Policy at the U.S. Council for International Business, USCIB. For those of you who are not familiar with USCIB, we are a business association that promotes the voice of business in the multilateral process. We have special standing with ECOSOC, and we engage across many different international organizations, whether it is the Internet Governance Forum, APEC, the IGF, WSIS Plus 20, et cetera. And so what I'd like to do now is I'd like to allow the panelists to each introduce themselves, and then we'll dive into some questions to get the conversation started. So thank you so much. And if we start with you, Veni, that would be great.
My name is Veni Markowski. I'm Vice President for Government and Intergovernmental Organization Engagement at ICANN and interim head of that department. Based in New York, I cover a lot of the UN agencies, UN, ITU, and others.
Hello everyone. I'm Jorge Cancio, Swiss government.
Hello, everybody. My name is Tatiana Trupina, and I'm a senior advisor on institutional relations at Internet Society.
Hi, I'm Jason Pilamar. I lead something called the Global Network Initiative, which is a multi-stakeholder organization working on free expression and privacy in the tech sector.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Anne-Marie Ingtoft-Melgar, and I'm the Danish Tech Ambassador.
Hi, everyone. I'm Flavia Alves, Director of International Organizations for Meta Platforms.
Thank you. So I think for the benefit of some of the newcomers in the room, I'll just say a couple of words just with respect to the history of WSIS and IGF. So the World Summit on the Information Society is coming up for its 20-year review. And through this process, it really laid out and established the multi-stakeholder model that we have today, and it helped to create the Internet Governance Forum. It helped to commit to create the Committee on Science and Technology for Development, CSTD. For those of you who are new, you may be hearing all these acronyms, and I know it can be overwhelming, so we're going to do our best to spell out those acronyms as we go along. But the first question that I'd like to ask our panel: what regulatory or political trends are undermining multi-stakeholder digital governance today, and how are they affecting global cooperation? Who would like to jump in first? Veni?
Thanks for volunteering me.
Yeah.
I wasn't gonna.
It's like law school, Socratic method.
Yeah, I was hiding here, but you saw me nevertheless. I don't know that we can talk about we have ICANN has a regulatory, legislative regulatory tracking, which we do at every ICANN meeting. And for those of you who are not familiar, ICANN is the Internet Corporation for Assigned Names and Numbers. We coordinate the domain name system, the IP addresses, protocol parameters on the internet. And we have three times a year we have public meetings, and they're all accessible. There is recording from every session, and you guys can go and take a look at it, including it on our LegRec tracking. I would say that sometimes governments take decisions to regulate or to govern one or another aspect of the internet without thinking of the consequences that this might lead to. And sometimes this might lead to fragmentation at the technical level. So earlier today, Curtis Lindquist, our president and CEO, spoke at the opening of the IGF, and he mentioned that we're talking about coordination, not centralization of the functions that we do and the way it makes the internet work. So I think it's important to actually understand that it's better to talk to the technical experts before drafting or passing any legislation, because once it's passed, it's usually takes a lot of time to fix it. I can give example from my own Bulgaria, where in '99 the government introduced licensing for the internet service providers, and it took a whole case at the Supreme Court to get rid of it. So again, the urge here is to make sure that they use a multi-stakeholder model of somehow, or consultations when they're discussing issues. And again, ICANN is limited to talk about the technical aspects of the functioning of the internet. So we're looking always at, is the DNS working around the globe? Are the IP addresses working as the protocol parameters? And as long as they're working, whatever else is being governed and is being regulated on top of that, that's up to every country to decide, because they have legal jurisdiction in their borders. Thank you.
Thank you. Did I see someone else? Come on in.
The question on what are the political trends affecting global cooperation? I find myself every morning waking up and feel, a sense of uncertainty, insecurity, discombobulated. We got to be very honest that the fact that we're trying to think about multi-stakeholder cooperation in a time that is a shifting geopolitical order. The last 3 decades of an international rule-based order are right now at a conjunction where I'm not sure what the answer is going to be a few years down the line. There's an uncertainty, there's an intensified strategic and economic competition globally, and we do not know the outcome of that. And it is impacting the multi-stakeholder and the multilateral processes as we speak. There's an increase in conflicts around us, unfortunately, and we see that on the rise. All of this leads to an erosion of trust. The definition of trusted partners, I think, and I can speak for my own country on this, is changing. And so the combined sort of uncertainty, competition, uncomfortable truth that we do not know the future we're going into is making cooperation incredibly hard. And what I hope for me, IGF, this year will be a sense of what can we meaningfully do to continue and drive some of this forward? What does meaningful, inclusive, effective, multi-stakeholder governance look like in a world that is so fundamentally different than it was last year when we met at IGF?
Thank you. And I would agree with that. I sit on the Multi-Stakeholder Advisory Group, which is the MAG. And so we've been having a lot of conversations around this as well, and conversations around the value of the IGF and how we can support it and support the multi-stakeholder model throughout. Tatiana, did you want to?
Yes, thank you. And maybe I will go back a bit from the geopolitical tensions to what Veni was talking about and start from this perspective. There is a tension, especially in the current geopolitical climate, between sovereign states and their borders and them trying to navigate this climate. And tension between states and sovereign borders and the open, interoperable and globally connected internet. And when Veni was talking about regulation, especially regulation on the top of this network, we can recognize that states do have very valid concerns. For example, about security, safety of their citizens, online harms, crime, as well about their autonomy. their ability to represent their citizens, their ability to protect their citizens. But again, as Veni said, the way states address these concerns, or maybe regional organizations are trying to address these concerns collectively, could harm the global interoperability and connectivity, perhaps sometimes even inadvertently as unintended consequence. And in this way, what I see as a trend that is hampering the multi-stakeholder model on a global level and interoperability and connectivity is the focus on national and regional sovereign policies, regulations. And it's not only about affecting the internet, it also affects the global cooperation, because when you are focusing on your territory, you're losing this global picture. And this tension cannot be resolved just by saying, okay, let's ditch the multi-stakeholder process, let's go to more national, intergovernmental, multilateral regulatory process. So we must work together in this multi-stakeholder fashion to address these threats and to address the trends globally. And while we're addressing those concerns globally, they're valid concerns, they're legitimate concerns, we have to preserve the global connectivity and interoperability. So we can have safety, we can save security, and at the same time, we can have open and globally connected internet. Thank you.
Thank you. And Jason, I know GNI has been doing a lot of work around this. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, thanks. So really building on what everyone else has said already, and just maybe to pull out a few regulatory trends, I think the concerns, the legitimate concerns, as Tatiana was articulating, for addressing harms on the internet, I think are well understood, and there's a recognition that sovereign states will, in certain circumstances, need to take steps to address those harms. A challenge is that where states try and address those harms in imprecise or disproportionate ways, they end up not only creating impacts within their own jurisdiction for their own citizens, but they create impacts across the internet because of its interoperable, interconnected nature. So, examples like network blocking or even network shutdowns, attempts to take censorship deeper and deeper into the technology stack are sort of examples of that trend. On the other hand, there are more appropriate, more proportionate efforts that have been that are being developed. The Digital Services Act in the EU, the Online Safety Act in the UK. These are not perfect, but they do at least attempt to address the content layer of the internet in a way that recognizes that not every platform has the same business model, not every platform has the same risk profile, the same user base. And so they center on risk management frameworks that allow for a degree of flexibility. And those approaches, I think, have more promise and do less damage to sort of the fundamental layers of the internet architecture. But they too are now being politicized, right? And we're seeing an attempt to brand, common sense, good faith efforts to regulate as censorship themselves. And it's not to say that there aren't concerns about how these laws could be misused. And unfortunately, we have seen high-level political figures in Europe, articulate a desire to use regulation in ways that we would consider inconsistent with the regulatory frameworks themselves. But by and large, these are good faith efforts to try and address legitimate concerns. And the fact that they're becoming politicized and getting caught up in these broader geopolitical headwinds is of real concern. Because if these efforts can't succeed, then I'm afraid we will see the more far-reaching, the more disproportionate efforts prevail, and that will do more damage to the interoperable global internet.
And then this makes the business environment particularly very, very difficult. Flavia, from Meta's perspective, how is this having an impact?
Yes, I think some of my colleagues made this comment here, and I think the most impact for us is the impact of calls for data localization, digital protectionism in general, that can result on censorship. But having us having to reform or reduce or just respond to requests for reduction and removal of content on our platform in a speed process that can actually result in censorship. That is something that is actually impacting the global network in a way that is a result of an internet fragmentation, obviously. And so getting back to the point, I think every other colleague here made a comment on how it is important to take into account this digital sovereignty asks and see how it impacts on internet fragmentation, but how can we go back to the WISA's principles and bring it back the importance of multi-stakeholder participation in these conversations. The WISA's had provided us a platform to discuss these issues, and I think we should take the opportunity that we have now to readdress how to connect on these matters with the stakeholders on the ground. Technical community has an important factor in expertise to talk on those issues, just like business that can say what is commercial or what is actually doable and for us to respond, and how should we be protecting an open, interoperable, and free internet for all.
Thank you. And Jorge, did you have thoughts?
Yeah, maybe too many to put them in 90 seconds or in 2 minutes. I think we are living in a time of contradictions, and which is paradoxical in many ways. So we had some years ago this a report from the high-level panel on digital cooperation, which was called Cooperation in an Age of Digital Interdependence. And at the same time, we have the mounting geopolitical tensions, the different interests, and of course, much more political attention to what formerly 20 years ago was a much more technical subject. And you see that at all levels, and it doesn't make our life easier, but I wouldn't see linear evolution or just a linear path of development. There are many contradictions. It depends on the level where you are talking about. It depends on the subject you are talking about. It depends on what the national stakeholders or the national government is doing about it. So just to mention some examples. Of course, we have, for instance, the more technical management of the internet. And here we talk about ICANN, for instance, and I have here Veni to my right. And what we see is much more attention from governments to things like DNS abuse, to the malicious use of some of the elements of the DNS where ICANN has a role. And at the same time, we see the ICANN model that takes some time to get people together and to agree, and maybe not all incentives are always set right to deliver, because political attention means that also the political people who are responsible, are accountable, are really made responsible if there are no results. So that's also something the community, the technical community, or the people, the community that is participating in ICANN has to take into account as a legitimate concern. So it's not just a top-down decision of government officials who have no clue about the issue. It's really about things that affect the people. And I think I'm optimistic on the possibility of these multi-stakeholder organizations and communities to deliver. Then you have other, for instance, AI, which is the topic of attention in many places during this forum. And you could say, okay, has there been a move for top-down regulation of AI? Now, there are many contradictions. There are different positions all across the globe at the national level. But for instance, the first international, let's say, binding legal document on AI, which was developed by the Council of Europe, was very much based on a multi-stakeholder process. So we see how there are contradictions where in some places you can push the multi-stakeholder approach. In other places, you have a pushback So it depends very much. It depends also on us. And I think that brings us also to the next topic, maybe to WSIS Plus 20. We've seen what happens when you have a weak process, when you have a process where multi-stakeholder is just a lip service, is something that is not really felt. And we have an opportunity to learn from that and to improve things based on that learnings, and to make the multi-stakeholder approach in the WSIS Plus 20 review much more powerful.
Thank you. I want to pause there. Is there anyone from the audience who would like to ask something or add something? Come on up to the microphone.
This microphone is always on.
Please tell us your name and where you work and all that good stuff.
It's very tall. Can you hear me?
Yes.
All right. My name is Milton Mueller. I'm at the Internet Governance Project at Georgia Tech. There's kind of like a missing link or an elephant in the room that you're not talking about. I think Mia raised it sort of by implication, and I think Flavia raised it, and it's the issue of trade. So the protectionism and fundamentally the fragmentation and the sovereignty concerns you're talking about are fundamentally about digital free trade. Like, can you move data around borders? Can you offer services in different parts of the world? Or do you have to conform to completely different regulatory patterns? And you're so focused on multi-stakeholder cooperation, but the fact of the matter is that trade issues are negotiated by the WTO, which is a multilateral organization. Do you think it's possible for the multi-stakeholder model, which is not really a model, as we know, but do we think that civil society and others could participate in WTO negotiations? Could we infuse that process with multi-stakeholder participation the way we have, let's say, in ICANN and the IGF? That's my question.
Thank you. That's a great question, Milton. And thank you for helping to flesh out the conversation. Would anyone like to take a stab at an answer?
If nobody's willing, I can take it. But
Go ahead.
maybe.
Oh,
Well, I'll be happy.
We have a,
Mia?
Yeah.
Jump. You go first.
My name is Anne Marie,
I'm sorry.
but I think it says Mia up there. Mia is my incredibly wonderful colleague.
Okay, that's what was confusing me. I
good, if not
actually had to
better.
turn around at one point because I was like, I thought it was Anne-Marie, but
Mia is sitting right down here right now. She's not, but she did before. Anyway,
you're welcome to change your name at any
questions I
point.
do not answer, go to Mia afterwards. She's the brain behind all of this. I just get to sit here. So on this question, I think, technically, there you are, sir. Technically, yes. I think there's a bigger question and sort of the geopolitical, how effective is the World Trade Organization tackling what we're seeing now as a huge transformation of global trade. I come from a small open economy. We are very much free marketeers, but we're also not naive in understanding where the world is headed. And I think in that sense, it is critical to not think of the IGF, multi-stakeholder internet governance, going on over here, where we're all about free open internet, which is, let's be honest, that is not entirely how the world already looks today, right? That is a vision, and I think it's a vision that we firmly stand by. And with the EU presidency that we're going to be assuming in 5 days from now, 1st of July, that will be the same vision that we will be pursuing through WSIS and all of the other multilateral bodies. But we have to be very realistic that the world is heading in a different place, one of more protectionism, one where trade is no longer sort of a kumbaya place for us, but one of a lot of tension, and how to maintain a free open internet, because that is a prerequisite for the resilience and the securities of our communities. We had a discussion about this earlier today. How do we take that into the domain of national common interest? By the way, this is Mia entering over there. So any questions? And she is really which is even better, right? So just to say,
she can't hear what that we are talking about.
I know, which makes it better.
We are talking about you.
But so this is really a question of how do we maintain and preserve the model as much as we can in a radically different world, at least for the next couple of years. I don't have the answer. I have a promise from the Danish government that we will try to do as much as we can on infusing the multi-stakeholder model that we think worked well, not only for internet governance, but across the board. But it's not an easy play.
Venny, I think you wanted.
I think this is way better than.
Flavia?
Yeah, just a very, very quickly, Vinny. I think like when it comes to the discussion around data free flows of trust and data governance, and the conversations we're in are internationally now, I think definitely there are conversations on the bilateral level, there are conversations on the EU-US level, there are conversations at the WTO, there are conversations actually in other international multi-stakeholder forums, such as the OECD. And data flows is also not only an economic issue, but is also a privacy and security issue that we need to be careful and balance how we do the safeguards on privacy at the same time on law enforcement and others. So I think there is an excellent work that has been done by the OECD called the Trusted Government Access to Data Flows, Trusted Government Access. And that there was an input from not only private privacy agencies, but also law enforcement agencies. And the OECD got input from civil society as well as industry. And there was an agreement on how to approach data flows, to secure data flows, at least among those countries that are from OECD. This work continues at the OECD. But above all, what I believe there is also a discussion at the UN level in the WISAS process, which you believe should really be taken by other bodies that are more experts on this, such as the OECD. The WTO, I understand the conversation is very member state driven, not even us as private sector, we participate there. So I think in my expertise in this field, I would encourage us to go back to the OECD Trusted Government Access, but then move away from only government's discussion on this.
Thank you. Are there any questions online? No? Okay. Any other questions in the room before we move forward? Okay. And picking up on that point on trusted government access, we have the WSIS Plus 20 review. We have the implementation of the Global Digital Compact, which came together last year, right? How can we leverage the WSIS Plus 20 review and the GDC to reinforce trust? Is that possible? Can it reinforce inclusion? And can it reinforce global cooperation in digital governance? Come on.
I want to start first because unfortunately I have to leave for a bilateral which starts in 10 minutes. But I think it's very important to take the good things from the GDC, which is in our case, from ICANN's point of view, this is the text about internet governance, and use it in the WSIS Plus 20 review, because we've seen already with the Elements paper that was published last Friday that that language is gone completely. Actually, the language that is there about internet governance goes back to like 2002, maybe 3. And then the other thing which we have to have as a lesson, and we already see that actually in the WSIS Plus 20 organization, the Secretariat is way better in managing the WSIS Plus 20. They have multi-stakeholder consultations, they're taking notes, they're webcasting some of the stuff, you know. So we are hopeful that the co-facilitators have taken notes and are going to use the WSIS Plus 20 to show how a multi-stakeholder process could be implemented to the limits, of course, of the UN General Assembly Rules of Procedure, because we know from the WSIS Plus 10 years ago that there are certain requirements that the governments will never change for that particular process because they cannot be changed just for this process. They have to be changed for every other process. And so we are hoping that this is with regards to the processes in the way they work. Now, it's important to see how the relations between the WSIS and the GDC will be formed, because even though, for example, there was an agreed language in the GDC about the importance of the IGF, later last year in the ICT resolution discussions on the General Assembly, this language was taken back to before it. So for those of you who are listening and who are in the room, please understand that the UN processes are very complex and sometimes very complicated. And even though we have the good desire to provide our factual information, how the internet works and what is good in the processes so far, it's not necessarily that the governments will take this and will not decide to change it. So it's a very complex process. The ICANN community, I think, and the broader internet community had a wake-up call with the Elements paper because they were expecting maybe some support of the multi-stakeholder model, some support for the technical community, and that is not in the text. So there is a lot of areas that we would be able to contribute to try to persuade the governments to take the good language from the GDC. Thank you.
Thank you. And Tatiana?
Yes, thank you. Just zooming out a bit and building upon what Veni said, rather than looking at the text and words and shaping, I would say that how the question is posed, right? Reinforcing trust, reinforcing cooperation. We cannot reinforce trust, we cannot reinforce cooperation if we don't put multi-stakeholder approach in the core of these processes. Transparency and inclusion at the core. And Jorge, you said, you used the words lip service, right? So this inclusion should not be just talking for participation. I think it is important for stakeholders to see how their input is actually taken into account, for example, in the WSIS review process. And transparency is very much at the core of this as well. And here we can, for example, leverage the Net Mundial +10 guidelines, which is a very good reference. And secondly, and I think that it's everybody is talking about this, right? Let's not duplicate the processes, but I would add something to this. Not only not duplicate the process, let's not create alternative vehicles or alternative process to what we already have. This would also allow us to avoid duplication as much as possible, because very few stakeholders, if any, have resources to follow all this multiple complex process. Veni was talking about complexity of the UN process. And not only to follow, but also resources to contribute to these multiple duplicative tracks. So in this regard, and I think I've heard some discussions already happening here, how the IGF and national and regional initiatives can be leveraged as a good vehicle for continuing the WSIS, for strengthening the WSIS implementation and the promise of the WSIS, but also being used as a vehicle for the GDC implementation within the WSIS process. Again, they're very well positioned to address any issues within the GDC, and there are already existing channels. And any alternative process will significantly undermine this multi-stakeholder collaboration and participation. Also, with regard to IGF being such a vehicle, it should not become an avenue to sideline non-governmental stakeholders. When governments are discussing the GDC implementation or WSIS somewhere else, and other stakeholders are coming and discussing at the IGF. No, they should be brought together. And in this regard, the IGF as an avenue should be strengthened as open, inclusive platform. At the same time, the WSIS and the GDC implementation should become more transparent, more open, and more inclusive. So this is a mutual process. Thank you.
Thank you. And Jason, I know that the Global Network Initiative has been quite involved in the WSIS +20 discussions and the Global Digital Compact. What do you think?
Yeah, just to kind of synthesize a little bit, maybe what Veni and Tatiana was just saying, I think there is good text in the GDC that it would be helpful to see reiterated and underscored in the WSIS. However, the WSIS process has been around for 20 years. It sets out a very broad and I think fairly politically sophisticated approach to global cooperation around the internet and internet governance. The GDC is very new. It's a process driven by a relatively new office in New York, and that was facilitated and negotiated really in New York, which within the UN system is a very different operating environment than Geneva and some of the other centers of conversation multilaterally. So there's a real concern if the WSIS process essentially becomes transformed into GDC implementation rather than the WSIS being seen as a way to incorporate the objectives of the GDC into an existing process that is built with multi-stakeholder purchase and participation. So I hope that we can see those sort of textual references echoed into the WSIS, but without fundamentally changing kind of the locus or the process that WSIS has embodied and hopefully will continue to carry forward.
Thank you. And Flavia, I know that Meta and many other businesses have been really involved in the WSIS since its inception, as well as the Global Digital Compact. What do you think? Do you agree?
There are points, obviously, that, yeah, I agree that with Vinny and Jason. And so I think if I can step a bit, with regard to the WSIS in general, I think it's important for us to look at the process and the WSIS review right now. And so first we need to see and make sure this process is predictable, is transparent, and is inclusive. So to the extent that there are consultations, that there are papers, that we need to have enough time to be able to reiterate and connect between civil society and industry and others to submit comments. And those comments should actually be taken into account. And I think that's the process that we think should be established. We see a lot of good intention, and it sounds like co-facilitators are trying as much, and so we should continue to reinforce that. But then it comes with regard to the WSIS plus 20 resolution per se. And I think there is a critical opportunity for us to again reinforce the multi-stakeholder governance framework that we have seen for internet governance in general, and we should take advantage of that again and do so. For instance, the definition of internet governance for some might be not an issue right now. We've just heard something about, like, maybe the G77 are not necessarily concerned with internet governance. They are more concerned with AI, access, and etc. But I really think that we do not need to lose this opportunity to again reinforce internet governance, to again reinforce the principle of a multi-stakeholder approach to internet governance that we should be seeing on the definition that is right now in the elements paper. It's not. When it comes then to internet governance too, obviously it's very important to renew the IGF mandate. And now I wonder, is it important to renew or to make it permanent? Should we look into partner with others and making it permanent? As Cyril said, I was there at the WSIS resolutions discussions 10 years ago, and we are discussing exactly the same. Obviously, I'm getting old, but it went too fast. 10 years is too much, too fast, and we are here again. Should we make it permanent? It has been successful. We are having more and more participation from delegations such as China and Russia and others that before were not necessarily supposed or not approval of the IGF process. But now not only that, but they also are hosting. I mean, we all have an agreement here with countries that IGF, it's important. So I think we should take this opportunity to make it a permanent. And then obviously on the WSIS and the negotiation process, given the geopolitical process where we are, the UN negotiations now, issues such as human rights, AI, content information integrity, internet liability, copyrights, and et cetera, are going to be brought up. And I think we should go back to what the resolution has been adopted before and go into those, looking into those principles, but also take into account what has been discussed at GDC, and that's how I go to Vinny's point. I don't think we should open again the discussion around AI. I don't think we should open again the discussion of human rights. Human rights tax at the GDC is actually, Jason is much more of an expert, but it's actually something that we worked in and we support. And so we want to see action on that. Does that make sense to open again with the same stakeholders the discussion about human rights and internet? So us adopting that text, it's going to be interesting. And then finally, I think there are things that are good that everyone is working towards, and we should continue, but not forget, it's too very important, connectivity. There was a huge focus on connectivity, spectrum access, you're there as well, connectivity access, and etc. It is too important that we try to bridge the digital divide. It's too important that we try to assure that communities have access to the latest technology and emerging technologies. So that, I must say, for instance, on artificial intelligence, open source artificial intelligence has been shown as a way of actually getting much more people using the tool than any other. So we would be supportive of something around that. I think the negotiation should start in topics that we actually agree on. So connectivity, access, education, research. Are we talking research? And then afterwards, topics that we have issues that are hard to agree on, let's leverage the GDC that has already been adopted. I know long short, just to make sure that I do think both the WSIS and the GDC can actually be put together somehow as we lead to the December negotiations.
Great points. Thank you. And connectivity is so important. So thank you for raising that. With respect to making the IGF permanent, that is a topic that we've heard in a number of different meetings, and you know, it's been here for 20 years, and it has had some great results and some great success. Does that mean that it's permanent already? You know, like do we just make that push for it? Was one of the conversations that Flavia and I were just in recently, and so from a government perspective, Anne-Marie, what do you think?
So I think many things. One is on this discussion between WSIS and GDC alignment and negotiating text and sort of the outcomes. I think, you know, we advocate for transparent, inclusive negotiations of the WSIS. We very much support permanently institutionalizing the IGF because more global conversations about process, I don't think is going to lead to better outcomes. So it's also about institutionalizing what works. And that goes to my second point on all of this. As we are negotiating and spending years, it feels like for years since the first panel was set up in Geneva that led to the GDC, that led to the Office of the Tech Envoy, now with WSIS, with Net Mondial, going back to my initial conversations that the geopolitical backdrop is completely changing. Erosion of trust and an altered global environment as we know it. If individual people, citizens are to trust these UN processes actually delivering open, free, secure, stable internet and access for everyone to participate in the technological revolution, we need to focus on how to deliver that actually and not just negotiate text. And this is not to diminish the incredible work that many of us spend so much of our time on, which is negotiating commas and sentences and words, but ultimately, if we do not want to lose so many countries who still have yet to fully participate in the digital revolution and harvest that for prosperity, for human rights, for security, for dignity, for opportunity for all, we need to be thinking a lot more about what can we do on actually implementing this. I was just on maternity leave, so I've been away for some months, and I come back and curious. Thank you so much. What have we done? And the thing is that this takes a long time. But if you look at the commitments in the GDC on delivering on the SDGs and leveraging digital, we have so much work ahead of us. And I say that as a government. We say this in a time when we know that civil society is losing funding. We know this is a time where a lot of funding also going to digital connectivity is gone, where platforms are stepping back a little bit on platform accountability. So I think that this IGF should be not just about the negotiated text and how we do processes in New York and Geneva, but much more on how do we deliver for those who are on the fence of whether to be with us or be against us in these negotiations so that they trust us and that they see that the multi-stakeholder model is delivering on the promises that we made.
Thank you. And on your point on the dots and the commas and the hard work, Jorge, I know that you have been hard at work. You're also on the multi-stakeholder advisory group with me, and you've put so much into the IGF and other things. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, thank you. So it's difficult to sum up. Maybe some of you know that there's been a non-paper being circulated by the Swiss, so by my government. And if you are interested and you don't know it, please approach us because we are happy to share. And we try to, and we've been building that over many conversations, not only in WEOC, in the Western countries or in the global North, but with many partners from the global South to really see how we can build a UN system on digital governance that delivers for all. And that means to really look into the what and the how and how we get there. And on the what, I agree very much that it will be very difficult to go beyond what we agreed last year in the Global Digital Compact. There's a lot of substance there. Maybe if the process of WSIS Plus 20 is stronger, more inclusive, maybe we can move the needle in one or two issues, but it will be a hard thing. But more important than what is on paper is how we put it to work. And there, especially thinking about this UN 80, which is a budget cut process within the UN system, we cannot afford any baroque duplications and having parallel processes, and some of them established ex novo. We have to update and use the WSIS framework. And the WSIS framework is really the UN agencies putting the WSIS vision and the WSIS action lines into work together with stakeholders all over the world. And that's what we have to update, putting the new agreements of the GDC into that work. That's why we are advocating for a joint implementation roadmap of the GDC integrated into WSIS. And we are advocating also to update the existing WSIS architecture, which is different UN bodies and UN structures, to instill them with a multi-stakeholder approach, to include stakeholder participation in the different steps of the work of the United Nations in this field, and of course, of improving and strengthening the IGF, making it permanent with a stable funding, a mixed funding, voluntary contributions, but also UN contributions. And that will be a hard fight, but we are not talking about tens of millions. We are talking about a couple of millions, so it's doable. And we are also talking about other specific measures that we explain in our non-paper. So I think that, of course, the elements paper is lacking in many things. And as we have discussed here, it is also due to the fact that the co-facilitators decided to exclude everything that was minimally controversial. So it's very important for all stakeholders, for all of you, for all of us, to really participate in this consultation until the 15th of July. Put forward specific proposals, wording proposals if possible, on how to improve things. We will, of course, do on the basis of our non-paper. And let's use all channels of participation to the furthest extent possible. The co-facilitators are showing some willingness to go along the lines of the Sao Paulo multi-stakeholder guidelines. For instance, they have decided to establish this informal multi-stakeholder sounding board to help them in the negotiation process. And it's important that this is not just an elite group formed by a couple of members of the IGF leadership panel and the IGF MAC. It's important that those members are really connected to the rest of the global community and act as spokesperson, a group of the multi-stakeholder community in order to be in the negotiation process. And of course, we as governments, we have different possibilities to include stakeholders, like embedding them in our delegations. And we for sure are going to try to do that again, as we've done in the past.
Thank you so much. And we're moving toward the end, but I want to check with our online participants. Is there anyone that wants to ask a question or make a comment? No? Anyone in the room that would like to comment on anything that's been said? Come on up to the mic. If you can just let us know your name and who you're with, that'd be great.
Thank you very much. Juan Ortiz, PhD candidate at USC. I feel another elephant in the room is perhaps the inequality within the network currently, that we have massive companies. If you put Google and YouTube together, they have the same amount of clicks as the next 48 websites put together. We have a massive inequality in the distribution of value of being together. The 10 richest people, I think 8 of them have made money off the internet. So, we're talking about connectivity. We want to connect everyone, but what are we connecting them to? We have very little technical distribution, that main companies keep their headquarters in the US. They don't create jobs elsewhere. And we have the weaponization of these infrastructures. So, you know, the ICC emails got cut by Microsoft. So how are we going to remain together if being together implies weaponization, implies inequality, implies lack of distribution of value? So I think one of the elephants in the room is what's happening with antitrust, what's happening with taxes, what's happening with disarmament.
Thank you for your comment. Collaboration comes to mind when you mention that. Does anyone on the panel want to respond or make a comment related?
Well, I wished I had the response to that, but I think it's important if we are talking about multi-stakeholder approach, and you look into the Sao Paulo multi-stakeholder guidelines, which were adopted last year. The first guideline addresses that point, the point of asymmetries of power, asymmetries of influence. So it's really a very tough question, but I think we can evolve also the multi-stakeholder approach to at least try to address some of those issues.
Thank you. Anne-Marie?
It's absolutely an elephant in the room. I think there are three sort of main things that we're doing. It's from my sort of own perspective. One is the DMA, so the European legislation on actually trying to make better market access for more players. Two, how do we support innovation? Because right now, I think the power grab, and you're rightly, so much of internet traffic is really within very, very few platforms. So how do we support an innovation for European companies from all over the world that can deliver internet platforms to compete and allow for diversity? Because with that also comes the diversity of what are we discussing online, how are we discussing online, how are we engaging online, what are we using and spending our time on digitally. And then I do think the third one, and that goes back to how we're thinking about the multi-stakeholder cooperation, which is really also around platform accountability, because it's going to be some time before that we're going to see a fundamentally different picture of how it looks today. But I do think, just as a hopeful comment, this is not the end of the digital revolution. Just because this is how it evolved for the past 10, 15 years, you have very few companies who've been incredibly successful to the point that we have very few others competing with them. Why can't we change that? I mean, the evolution, and I think especially the incredible innovators out there, the open source community who I think sort of ebbs and flows over the past 30 years, but have gained an incredible traction again. The use of AI, not only from the existing large platforms, but very much in the hands of people around the world. Maria Ressa is here with Rappler. There's so many new platforms that are starting to see the day of light. We have discussions on how we meaningfully engaging online, and that also means diversifying the services that we're using. So I do find there's to be this is not the sort of the height of it, and from here on it's just downwards. We're really at an opportunity and an inflection point, I think, for a rethinking the internet we want, and how does it live up to the hopeful expectations back in 1992 of actually providing this wide array of opportunities and emancipation for individuals and citizens in all sorts of acceptance form rather than where we are today.
Thank you so much. And as we close out, maybe we can close out this way. I'd like to give everyone just really, really quickly, we'll go down. What specific action, we've had a lot of discussion about what we need to do, but what specific actions could we prioritize if we are to ensure meaningful, inclusive, and effective multi-stakeholder cooperation? Tatiana?
Yes, I can start. Just to sum up basically what we discussed here. First of all, we should continue demanding that the WSIS plus 20 review and GDC implementation process is transparent and inclusive, that stakeholders' input is taken into account, and we should participate, as Jorge said. And in terms of priorities, I have three. Protect the global interoperability and connectivity, ensure that this is put at the core. Secondly, strengthen the multi-stakeholder cooperation by reaffirming commitment to the multi-stakeholder model in the WSIS plus 20 review, and also by evolving the IGF and renewing its mandate, also making it permanent. And thirdly, And this goes to what was said about connectivity. The original WIS's goal was connectivity. We still have 1/3 of the world not connected. The WIS's has to deliver. We have to strengthen its implementation to address the current and emerging digital divides.
Thank you. And we're running short on time, so I'm going to give Flavia the last word.
Sure. So I think one thing very quickly, and following the question from the audience as well, it is important that on the multi-stakeholder to make sure it works, that every single stakeholder play their role. And so, for instance, when we say about making sure the internet is accessible, free, and open for everyone, how do we do that as us? I speak for industry now. We invest in connectivity. We have just announced a submarine cable that is one of the biggest, that is called Project W. It's going to go around to have users, to give users access to the latest technologies we have. But our users are also not necessarily receiving information. They are actually small business, selling, trading, and creating in our platform. So that responds to the economic question. We are also helping increase in economic value in these countries. But then when it comes to the use of platforms, it's important for everything. It's important for us to also invest on education and awareness. 10 years ago, we were discussing the importance of helping education, including accessibility, awareness programs to make sure folks are using the internet as they should. There are people that have access that might not know necessarily how to use the internet. But then when it comes to the WISAs, I have said my points before, making sure the process is right, making sure internet governance is included, and multi-stakeholder process is defined there too.
Thank you so much. And I want to say thank you so much to our audience. Thank you for the questions. For our online audience as well, thank you so much for joining us. And for anyone who, raise your hand if you're an IGF newcomer, if this is your first IGF. That's awesome. So I hope that we keep continuing to see you guys in these meetings. I hope that, you get involved, and I hope to be sitting there and listening to you guys up here at one of your next panels, maybe at the next IGF. So thank you so much. And let's give it up for our panel.